Imagine walking into a supermarket right now. You casually pick up a pre-packaged tray of beef, scan it at the checkout, and pay. 10 easy minutes. Not a trace of danger. The survival instincts, shaped over thousands of years, now suddenly have nothing left to fight against. Yet for most of human history, getting that same piece of meat meant our ancestors had to confront enormous creatures heavier than a car. Animals that certainly had no intention of dying quietly. So how did a weak species with no claws and no fangs rise to become the most dangerous predator on the planet? The answer is this: there was only one way. It was an entire system of sophisticated tactics, cold calculation, and strategies so ruthless that researchers today are still gathering fragments of the past, trying to reconstruct the full picture. Let us begin with a method that sounds completely backward, a weapon known as a spear, yet perhaps never meant to be thrown at all. For years, archaeologists kept uncovering razor-sharp Clovis points buried deep inside mammoth bones across North America. The assumption seemed obvious: ancient hunters simply threw their spears at the prey. But a 2024 study from the University of California, Berkeley, shattered that long-standing belief. The throwing force of an ordinary human was simply no match for the massive defenses of a beast weighing as much as 6 tons. Something in this story had been misunderstood. And here's what may actually have happened. The hunter did not throw the spear. He planted the shaft at an angle into the frozen ground, aimed the point upward, then stepped back and braced it in place. The mammoth charged forward at nearly 15 miles per hour. Its own enormous mass generated an impact force up to 67 times greater than a human throw, driving the spear point deep into its own chest. But here's the detail most history books leave out. If the spear had been planted at even a slightly wrong angle, or if the ground had shifted beneath the hunter's feet, that enraged 6-ton monster could have crushed the exact spot where he stood in an instant. This was never a safe game. It was a life-or-death gamble calculated within a margin of error of less than 2 seconds. Far beyond what we might expect from prehistoric technology. The spear point itself was a devastating weapon of astonishing sophistication. The moment it pierced the skin, its distinctive shape caused the stone point to twist, widening the wound from within, a brutal mechanism not unlike a modern hollow point bullet. The most dangerous predator of the ancient grasslands, it turned out, could be destroyed by the momentum of its own furious charge. But not every hunt required a spear. Sometimes our ancestors used a far simpler weapon: stones. At Cave of Hearths in South Africa, scientists discovered rounded stones that had been carried for throwing at distances of up to 25 meters. They were heavy enough to bring down smaller prey, and they were never chosen at random. Each stone was carefully selected for its weight and shape, a true prehistoric ammunition stockpile. With larger prey, that same idea was scaled up to devastating proportions. One group of hunters would drive the animal into a narrow canyon with no escape. Above them, others waited on rocky ledges, ready to send massive stones crashing down onto the prey below. Controlling the high ground was not merely an advantage, it was the entire strategy. Before we go any further, tell us which country you are watching from in the comments below. Because in just a moment, things are about to become far more brutal. Some groups had no intention of risking close combat with dangerous animals. Instead, they turned the landscape itself into a weapon. Seen from above, these structures look like enormous kites drawn across the desert. They consist of 2 stone walls stretching for hundreds of meters, running alongside one another before gradually narrowing into a funnel. From ground level, you might never realize that you had just stepped into a trap. The walls were deliberately built low. They were only high enough to feel unusual, making prey hesitate to jump across them, but not high enough to look like a true barrier. Our ancestors understood a simple truth: you do not need to imprison an animal. You only need to make every other direction feel more difficult. and eventually it will run down the one path you have already chosen for it. In 2022, 3 independent research teams confirmed the purpose of these desert kites. They were enormous funnels designed to drive entire herds of gazelles and other wild ungulates straight into deep pits or over cliff. What is strange is the similar traps appear across an enormous stretch of the world, from Jordan and Saudi Arabia to Kazakhstan and the Andes. Even though these cultures never met or shared blueprints with one another, they independently arrived at the same solution because the laws of animal behavior may have left only one truly optimal answer. At this point, the story is no longer about stone walls or spears. It enters a far more dangerous and sophisticated chapter: chemical weapons prepared by hand. In January 2026, a study published in Science Advances revealed that 60,000-year-old arrowheads from Umlatuzana rock shelter in South Africa still carried traces of a powerful plant-based toxin. The poison was extracted from a bulb-bearing flowering plant whose toxins attack the cardiovascular system and blood vessels directly. The preparation process was brutally simple: crush it, boil it, and smear it onto the arrowhead. Yet the same liquid could kill the hunter who prepared it just as easily as it could kill the prey. A single accidental scratch on the hand during preparation could turn the hunter into the first victim of his own weapon. What made this weapon so insidious was that the arrowhead was deliberately made extremely small, too small to kill the animal immediately on impact. The hunter would strike the animal, watch it run away as if nothing were wrong, then quietly follow its trail for hours. He knew the poison was already spreading through the bloodstream and would eventually bring the prey down. That was not instinct. It was a brain capable of understanding cause and effect across a delay of many hours, an extraordinary form of reasoning in a species that had not even invented writing. The same poison, derived from the same plant, was still being used by hunters in southern Africa as late as the 17th century. The method was so effective that hunters in southern Africa passed it down for 2,000 generations without a single written instruction. But of all these methods, the most terrifying was also the simplest, an ability that no animal on Earth could truly match: running without stopping. Physically, the human body looks almost like a joke of nature. No claws, weak fangs, fragile skin, poor night vision, and a sense of smell that is almost useless. Our sprinting speed is not even enough to outrun a chicken. Yet we possess one unique superpower: the ability to maintain a steady running pace for hours under brutal heat, something no four-legged animal can sustain in quite the same way. With roughly 5 million sweat glands spread across the body, more than any other animal on Earth, humans can continuously cool themselves while moving. A wolf, meanwhile, can overheat, while a cheetah may be completely exhausted after only 30 seconds at full speed. Our bodies are remarkably well adapted for endurance. The Achilles tendons work like biological springs. The gluteal muscles, the largest muscle group in the body, are built for sustained running rather than ordinary walking. We can even breathe independently of our stride cycle, something four-legged animals generally cannot do. In the Kalahari Desert, researchers have witnessed this persistence hunting technique firsthand among sand hunters. A hunter would relentlessly track a kudu antelope through scorching heat above 99 degrees Fahrenheit. He could keep moving for 15 to 25 miles at a steady pace. The hunter himself was gambling with death, pushing his body toward temperatures capable of killing a living creature, never knowing for certain whether he might collapse before the prey did. After roughly 2 to 5 hours of pursuit, the antelope's body temperature would rise beyond what it could tolerate. Eventually, it collapsed from heat stress. The hunter simply walked up and brought the chase to a quiet end. From the prey's point of view, a ghost was following behind it. Something that never seemed to tire, never slowed down, and never gave up. Here's the part that most videos on this subject tend to rush past. History books often paint the image of muscular men carrying spears and hunting large animals. But the archaeological evidence tells a very different story. A study published in 2020 examined a 9,000-year-old burial in the Andes and found the skeleton of a woman buried with a complete toolkit for hunting large game. Broader surveys suggest that roughly one-third of ancient big game hunters may have been women. Anyone who could throw, track, and run long distances could become a hunter, regardless of gender. Every method we have explored so far still depended on a single hunter or a small group. The ultimate upgrade came when humans stopped hunting as individuals and began coordinating like a professional army. At Schöningen in Germany, archaeologists discovered 8 finely crafted wooden spears beside the butchered remains of around 50 horses at the same site. That was not luck. It was an organized operation. Someone had to predict exactly where the herd would gather. Someone had to quietly drive the animals into position. And someone had to wait with a spear in hand, keeping a cool head until the decisive moment. To make that system work, humans needed a weapon more advanced than any spear or trap complex language. They needed language to plan an operation before it happened, and assign specific roles to each member of the group. Then, sometime between 15,000 and 35,000 years ago, the greatest turning point arrived. Humans made a decision unlike anything seen before in natural history. Instead of eliminating their competitors, they recruited them. At 11,500-year-old archaeological sites in Jordan, researchers found a sudden surge in deposits of small animal bones. Strangely, many of them carried distinctive traces of having passed through the digestive systems of dogs. The clearest evidence appears in rock art from Saudi Arabia, dating back 8,000 to 9,000 years. One tiny detail changes everything: dogs shown on leashes, working like a professional team for driving and controlling prey. The symbiotic relationship spread across the planet with remarkable speed. But the bond became far more than a hunting tool. It was not merely practical, it was built on understanding. A dog could smell and track wounded prey that a human could never follow, and it might even throw its own body into the path of an animal charging toward its human companion. For the first time, a hunter no longer had to carry the risk of death alone. Yet there is a question almost no one ever thinks to ask. What happens immediately after the monster falls? A mammoth lying face down in the snow is not yet a feast. It is 4 tons of meat that can begin to spoil within a matter of hours. So the entire tribe has to rush into a new battle. Some butcher the carcass. Others carry the meat, while separate groups smoke it or dry it. They are racing against time. Before scavengers catch the scent and relentless decay steals the prize the entire tribe has just risked its life to win. The hunt itself might last only a few minutes, but turning that kill into enough food to sustain an entire tribe through a freezing winter required the entire community to coordinate almost perfectly for days on end. The chase was never the hardest part. Surviving on what the hunt provided was the real challenge. Every method you have just seen pushed our ancestors toward one enormous turning point: learning to control an animal's behavior instead of simply overpowering it with muscle. And once you know how to lure an animal, trap it, or drive it exactly where you want it to go, the next step is no longer to chase it. The next step is to keep it close. That great transition, beginning around 10,000 years ago, quietly transformed wild hunting grounds into fertile agricultural landscapes. Which brings us all the way back to that trip to the store at the beginning. The packaged tray of meat you can pick up from a shelf in less than 10 minutes is the finish line of an unbroken chain of evolution and innovation stretching across 300,000 years. The spear planted into the ground using physics instead of muscle. The giant desert trap using engineering instead of direct confrontation. Poison on an arrowhead using chemistry instead of brute force. And the uniquely human endurance chase, relentless persistence, combined with a symbiotic bond with a species that had once been a deadly rival. None of them had laboratories for research. They had no schools to teach them, and not even a single sheet of paper on which to record knowledge for the next generation. All they had was sharp observation, extraordinary memory, and hard-earned lessons passed down across thousands of generations. So here's the question I truly want to ask you in the comments of all the extraordinary survival methods our ancestors used in this video. Which one do you honestly think you could master? Because every one of us sitting here reading these words right now exists only because somewhere in the distant past, someone found the answer first.